Hey gang, welcome back. Let's work on some electrics today. First up, we got this National Resophonic here. The strap button up here is loose, wiggling around, and apparently wants to unscrew. So we will tighten that up. Pretty nifty guitar. It's got Johnny Winter's signature on the back. So while I'm unscrewing this, I'll say a big thank you to all those guys out there who are leaving such nice comments on my videos. I really appreciate it. Thinking about doing a question and answer video soon, so if you have questions that you'd like me to answer, you can put them in the comments. I'll make a list and I'll put the good ones on the internet for you. I've also been getting an awful lot of emails from guys in the US inquiring about whether I'll fix their guitar for them. And I'd say before you send that email is go on over to like the UPS site or FedEx and check out and see just exactly what it costs to ship a guitar across the border into Canada and back again. Because you're looking at about $200, and that seems exorbitant. Also, does your guitar have Rosewood for the fingerboard or the bridge, head plate, that kind of thing? So Rosewood's on the CITES treaty list, and although the regulations are kind of up for debate right now, it's possible that you require paperwork to ship it out of the country, and importing it might be a real hassle for you. The other thing you have to prove is that the guitar is actually coming here for repair and not being sold, otherwise one or both of us is going to get hit with import duties. So I would suggest looking around in your state. Every major city in the US has got a guitar repair guy, more than one. And there'll be someone around who will be anxious to help you out with your job. Not that I don't want to fix your guitar, it's just it's an awful lot of hassle for us both, and probably pretty expensive. Okay, up next we've got a Cower guitar. This is a Cower Daylighter. They're a company in California. They're sort of a boutique maker. They do small batch, historically inspired designs like this, and quite nicely made. It was a recent purchase by a local client I do an awful lot of work for. It's got a Wengi fingerboard, flame maple bindings, really nice maple top, lots of flame, and back and sides are Spanish cedar. Spanish cedar looks and behaves an awful lot like mahogany, but it's quite a bit lighter, so it's pretty fun to play, I imagine. Anyhow, he wants a setup on this. He actually wants me to raise the action, and that will just, blow the minds of a lot of people in the comment section. Those guys who are always after me suggesting that my action adjustments are way too high. No, they're not. They are designed for the needs of a specific player. And just because you like your action super low does not mean that the entire world needs to follow your guidelines. And in this case, even though it plays relatively cleanly at about 3/64 of an inch, we're going to take it up to about 4.5 because he plays slide, and that's the way he likes his guitars. So that's what we're going to do. Plug into the old half stack there. It fits on the bench, okay? And yep, seems pretty good. Pretty clean. Okay, this guitar is in great shape. I just noticed something here that kind of drives me nuts. I'm going to point it out. It's like a junior style bridge. These are locking studs. Quite nice. And it looks like someone has tried to adjust them with a smaller than appropriate screwdriver. What happens is, if you got a driver that's too narrow, it will rotate in the slot, and all of your torque, all that force is going on 2 points, fore and aft. And the metal won't withstand that. It will deform. It'll basically end up with a little divot on either side, and it looks cheesy, This is a $3,500 guitar. Looks practically brand new, except for that. And once it happens, you can't really recover. I've got a driver that I've ground specifically for use in two-pneumatic style situations. Fits in there perfectly, doesn't rock backwards and forwards, got good contact all the way along. What happens if you don't have one of those? You can buy them, you can make them. Get the biggest screwdriver that you can, and a piece of cardboard, like a business card, string packet, what have you, that you can fold over a couple of times and fur it out a little bit. Even like paper towel will work in a pinch. But just whatever you do, don't try to put that bare metal on there. Use the appropriate tool. And let's not have any more of that, okay? He said he felt the neck was a little too straight for him. And in terms of relief, yeah, there's not very much relief there. So we're going to loosen that rod slightly. It's got like a ventilated truss rod cover. kind of neat. Okay. It's interesting. Something there in the slot over the frets. It says 18 on it. A little piece of plastic. Okay, truss rod adjustment. A little goes a long way, right? When you're looking at the end of the guitar this way, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. And I want to loosen the truss rod slightly to give me more relief. So I'm going to go this direction. And 1/8 of a turn is a lot. You can actually hear the truss rod groaning a bit in there against the board as it loosened off. Okay. It's interesting. This is a nut. They've done scallop work in between each individual string, which is usually you see that on classical guitars from the 1970s. Not very many electric makers do that. Alright, we got lucky. It was bang on. First time, 12 thousandths of an inch relief, which is what I like. I'm just going to replace this 18 in here just to keep the guitar original. You never know, it might be very important. And we'll replace the cover and we can check and see on the action. Okay, the reason you do the neck relief adjustment first is that little tiny adjustment there, going from 2 thousandths of an inch to 12 thousandths, has raised the action on the bass side a full 64th of an inch. So it's most efficient to do it that way, rather than having to go back and readjust. So I'm going to be raising the bridge up slightly. I'm going to detune the strings so that there's less pressure on it. Don't have to go all the way, just loosen them off. These locking posts come in two parts. There's the top section, which is threaded. It screws into the base, which in turn goes into the threaded stud in the top. And it's actually on that bottom section where the adjustment is. There are a couple of flats ground into it. And use a 12mm spanner or wrench to affect the adjustment. If you don't happen to have a thin line one, you've got to take everything apart, do the adjustment, put it all back together, restring, and then check it and see it. I happen to have the thin line, so I'm going to do it with the bridge in location. I'm going to protect the surface of the top just in the event that my wrench slips, although I'm not going to touch the top. I'm going to be very careful. There's a piece of paper there. And before I do the actual adjustment, I'm going to loosen the locking studs just a little bit. If I kept them clamped down tight, you know, I'm going to be racking the whole assembly slightly as I change the angle, and I want there to be a little bit of room for that to move around. So if there's any sort of eccentricity in the way the holes are drilled or anything, it's not going to sort of bend or damage the tailpiece. So in order to do this, you've got to find the flat sections, and I'm going to be basically unscrewing these things upwards so that I can raise the action. So again, I'm going lefty for loosey. I'm not going to do that while you're watching because it's easier if I tip the whole thing up and actually see what I'm doing. Okay, we're up at 4 1/2 now. I've gone ahead and I've locked down the locking posts again. I'm going to do a string change. It's also nice to have a piece of paper around here in this kind of bridge so that the ends of the strings have no opportunity to scratch the finish. And I'm going to oil up the board. Recheck to make sure nothing happened with the truss rod. Sometimes you do an adjustment and it can be a sort of a delayed reaction. Notice that on virtually every video I post these days, someone asks if I can do metric equivalencies for every single measurement I give. And, my thought is, of course, that information is readily available out there. You can download a conversion chart for free in a million different places, or even plug it into Google. But the other half of that is you should probably learn how to do that yourself on the fly if you're actually interested in doing work on guitars, because at some point you're going to run into American-made instruments, and all the classic designs were designed in imperial measurement. So it's just good to familiarize yourself and get in the habit of learning how to do that kind of thing. Any measurement I give you is not really going to translate into the real world, because the guitar that you're going to be faced with is not going to be the one that I'm working on in the video. And like I was saying earlier, in terms of action, there is no right or wrong. There is only what is proper for the situation at hand. who you're doing the work for. The other thing I want to do this afternoon is bend some sides for the guitar I'm working on. This has got a Florentine style cutaway. I've already made the block that supports the point here, and I've got my head block and my tail block ready to go. And yeah, I'm using the Spanish slipper style foot for both my steel strings and my classical guitars. And that comes from mostly just observing what goes on during neck resets. Think about your standard, imagine this is a standard square cut head block. The reason we have to do neck resets isn't so much that the neck is actually warping forward. It has more to do with the guitar trying to fold in on itself and the blocks tipping a little bit towards each other over time. Square cut block like this, all of the pressure that's going on it is focused on the line just in the front here, and it's tippy. A little bit of pressure, you can tip it over. You can't do that with a slipper style foot. It's just much more stable. And it transfers all that force out over a much larger area and eventually onto the transverse bar that runs across the upper bout. So I think it's a good, strong system, good and stable, and that's why I like it. That's why I'm using it. For bending sides, I use a number of different systems depending on the project. If it's a design I figure I'm going to be making more than once at some point, I will take the time to build a mold. This is not unlike a Fox bender mold. It's solid. This one's made out of MDF. Could be plywood, particle board, whatever. Actually, it's not really solid. I took the time to cut out some of the inside so that it doesn't weigh 50 pounds. And rather than the veneer press screw to drag in the waste, I just clamp it using F-clamps. Works well for me. And it's used in conjunction with a Watlow heat blanket, which is pretty standard these days. Not many people use the old light bulbs for heating anymore because it's pretty difficult to find an incandescent light bulb. So yeah, this works well. It looks ugly and I don't care. I build them fast and they're just sort of quick and dirty. For the Florentine style cutaway, I could also make another mold for that. I'm just going to bend it by hand because that's good practice and it should be no problem. We can talk a little bit about bending sides as the iron heats up here. I'm using mahogany for this guitar, which is a relatively easy wood to bend. Rosewood works fine too most of the time. It's when you get into things like figured maple, quilted maple especially, that you end up with serious issues. And it's very difficult to bend those woods by hand until you've had a lot of practice. So, you know, I would suggest getting some unfigured maple or cheap wood like poplar or something and practicing. We've got a pretty gentle radius here for the cutaway. Taken the time to draw it out here so I have a reference point when I'm bending. And if it was a more extreme radius, we might want to thin this more than we would our typical side would. I take my sides to about 2 millimeters or 80 thousandths of an inch. If this was like close to a little right angle bend, maybe 2 inches in diameter, I would probably go down to a 1/16 of an inch, maybe 65 thousandths in the tight area. You can get away with that because bent wood is actually more structurally stiff than like a gentle curve or a flat. So, and again, you're also going to be putting a lot of support on the inside as well with both the lining and side support if you happen to have it. Now, if you are trying to bend something with curly maple in it or something really figured, what you can do, here's a tip. Get yourself a piece of inexpensive sheet metal flashing. You go down to the roofing section of the local home center. They sell it in a roll. It's really whippy. It's probably like 22, 24 gauge. You can cut it with tin snips. So you cut yourself a piece that is just the exact right length with a couple of support blocks on either side. And what this does is during the bend, that outside surface that's prone to opening up and splitting, the fibers want to give way, that holds it all in tension, so they can't do that. I got the idea of this reading something by Paul Schubach, who is a violin maker, describing his apprenticeship in France. They used to bend over a charcoal brazier, and they would just cut a piece of a tuna fish can. It works great. Okay, it's good to double check and make sure you know which surface is going to be contacting the soundboard so you're not flipping the grain around. Double check. does not require a whole lot of water. Little spritz, just for a little bit of steam. You don't have to soak this thing in the bathtub. You don't have to, worry about it for too long. And the main thing when you're bending by hand is to make sure that the wood gets warm enough. So you pre-warm the entire length that is going to be bent. You can hear the steam being generated. And, you just sort of, there's a point where the wood kind of gives way, and you have to sort of learn how to feel it. It's not intuitive to everyone. There are some people who just never get the hang of this. They can't do it. So you either rock or you slide. Kind of give yourself a mental image of what the bend is going to look like. Now I'm wearing gloves in this case. If I didn't have the sheet metal slat there, I wouldn't need them. I mean, it gets warm on the outside, but it's almost like a temperature gauge. So we're just checking progress here. This section is fine. We need to start bending up here. The tendency for a beginner is to want to bend too much in this area. Have a look at where the curve starts. That's where you're going to start bending. Right back here, where it seemingly touches the line. That's where the actual apex of the bend has got to be. So we're going to work our way along, moving that point farther and farther across the curve. Bending on the form proceeds in much the same way. I clamp the sides in at the butt end of the guitar in between two sheets of that steel, and the sides are actually wrapped in some baker's parchment to keep any resins off the steel, keeps things cleaner. I work my way slowly up to the apex of the lower bout until the side is basically perpendicular with the waist area. Then it's a matter of slowly working my way down the hill. I use this shimmying, rocking motion here. Very steady. Now the bending forms are usually designed to accommodate some of the spring back that's going to happen when you take the sides off the form. So the waist is actually deeper by about 2.5 millimeters. The bend is more extreme, in other words, than the actual plan of the guitar. So when it comes off the mold, the sides are going to spring outwards a little bit, and that helps accommodate some of that. Eventually, when we get to the waist here, I will replace it with the shoe that has been designed to fit exactly in that curve. And then we'll clamp that in place. This requires a little bit of dexterity and planning to get the clamps on in the right order and have them open at the right place on the bench. After I finish bending the top section in the same way, I'll turn the heat off, let it cool down completely, and then turn it back on again to get good and hot for 5 or 6 minutes, at which point I'll pull it out. While it's still very hot, I'll put it into the mold, and I hold it in place using these little wooden clamps I designed. They work with all of my molds, just to press them up against the sides. Boy, that's a lot of clamps. But I got all the blocks installed. They went in nicely with no trouble, and I'm pretty happy with the way things have gone. One thing to remember, if you do this yourself, is before you put your bending equipment away, remember to bend your binding strips, because otherwise you'll kick yourself later for not having remembered. Anyhow, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon.